Hegemony of the proletariat in the People's Revolution. The first revolution in Russia in its nature was a bourgeois revolution, for the transformations that it was supposed to accomplish, the overthrow of the autocracy, the abolition of landed estates, the abolition of the estate system, etc. not only could not undermine the foundations of the bourgeois system, but should to clear the ground for a truly free development of capitalism. However, in these transformations the working masses were much more interested than the bourgeoisie. Therefore, workers and peasants not only from the very beginning actively participated in the revolution, but also tirelessly moved it forward, seeking a complete victory over Tsarism. It is precisely because the broad masses of the people have risen to fight for social transformations, bourgeois in their class content, that the 1905-07 revolution cannot be regarded as an ordinary bourgeois revolution. It was a bourgeois democratic revolution, in which the bourgeois content of the transformations was combined with the popular character of its driving forces, which made it not a top, but a deep, people's revolution. The Russian bourgeois revolution of 1905-07, wrote Lenin, was undoubtedly the real popular revolution, for the mass of the people, the majority of it, the deepest social bottoms, crushed by oppression and exploitation, rose independently, imposed on the whole course of the revolution the imprint of their demands, their attempts in their own way to build a new society, in the place of the destroyed old one. The popular character of the first revolution in Russia was most vividly expressed in that it was held from the very beginning under the hegemony of the proletariat. The working class, says the theses, 50 years of the first Russian Revolution, was vitally interested in the victory of this revolution. Only in this way could he achieve democratic freedoms, strengthen his organizations, acquire the experience and skills of leading the working masses and lead the struggle for conquest political power. At all the stages of the first revolution in Russia, the working class was at the forefront of the struggle, was the leader of all democratic elements oppressed by Tsarism, and above all of the multi-million peasantry. This peculiarity of the revolution of 1905-07 and its radical difference from the bourgeois revolutions of the 17th and 19th centuries was due to the peculiarities of the historical situation in which it was taking place. In Western European countries, bourgeois revolutions took place at an early stage in the development of capitalism. Then in these countries the proletariat was not organized yet, it did not have its own political party, it could not act in the revolution with an independent line. Under such conditions, the bourgeoisie, which at that time was a revolutionary force, since it was a question of crushing the feudal system, was the natural leader of all social groups oppressed by feudalism. Granting its own interests for the interests of the whole nation, it was then able to rally the anti-feudal elements of society and, above all, the peasantry and lead them to storm the dilapidated feudal system. 1. V. Lenin. Works, Volume 25, page 388. In contrast to Western European countries, the revolution in Russia began in the period of imperialism, when capitalism entered a period of crisis and decline, when the question of replacing capitalist production relations with socialist ones was already placed on the agenda of the day. If in the era of bourgeois revolutions in the West the proletariat, in view of the low level of development of capitalism, was a comparatively small, weak class, in Russia at the beginning of the revolution of 1905-07 it was one of the main classes of Russian society. Its number reached 3 million people, and more than half accounted for the share of factory workers. The presence of large enterprises and the associated high degree of concentration of the working class and the presence of a revolutionary party determined the rapid pace of its class maturation. By the beginning of the revolution of 1905-1907, the Russian proletariat had managed to go through a long way of fighting the bourgeoisie, during which it accumulated considerable experience of political activity, rallied to a militant, revolutionary force, realized its class interests and historical vocation. The class self-consciousness of the proletariat began to grow particularly rapidly after it was led by a revolutionary party of a new type, created by the great Lenin, infinitely devoted to the cause of the working class, faithful to the principles of revolutionary Marxism. The Bolshevik Party was the true leader of the proletarian masses, a skillful and courageous leader of them. In parallel with the process of maturation of the proletariat, as the most revolutionary class of society, another process was taking place, a process of steady growth of the counter-revolutionary nature of the Russian liberal bourgeoisie. Russian liberals never represented a revolutionary force. The liberal bourgeoisie in Russia, connected with Tsarism by thousands of threads, intimidated by revolutions in Western Europe and the rise of the revolutionary movement in Russia, was at all stages of the liberation struggle cowardly, flabby and feeble. She was constantly looking for deals with Tsarism. With the entry of capitalism into the imperialist stage, when the contradictions between labor and capital reached exceptional severity, the liberal bourgeoisie turned more and more resolutely into a watchman of reaction. It is noteworthy that in Russia the proletariat created its political party earlier than the liberal bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie sought to use the first revolution in Russia in its own interests. On the crest of the revolutionary wave, she wanted to get to power in order to share it with the Tsar and the feudal landowners, then with them to suppress the people's revolution. Thus, the liberal bourgeoisie, having not yet had time to assert its political domination in the country, found itself face to face with its formidable adversary, the proletariat, who set itself the task, in alliance with the peasantry, not only to destroy the autocratic system, but also to destroy the power of capital over labor, private ownership of tools and means of production, exploitation of man by man. The entire course of Russia's economic development put forward the proletariat as the hegemon of the bourgeois democratic revolution. This position fundamentally changed the role of the peasantry in the bourgeois democratic revolution of the era of imperialism. From the reserve of the liberal bourgeoisie, it has become a powerful military ally of the working class. The union of the two oppressed classes was prepared by the whole course of Russia's development. Lenin pointed out many times that in Russia the proletariat and the peasantry suffered not only from capitalism, but also from its underdevelopment. Therefore, both classes were deeply interested in uprooting to the end all remnants of serfdom, in overthrowing the Tsarist autocracy, in the abolition of the landowners' latifundia, in the abolition of the class humiliation and lawlessness of the masses. The common interests and goals of the struggle of the workers and peasants made them natural allies in the First Russian Revolution. During the revolution of 1905–1907, the proletariat laid the foundations for an alliance with the peasantry, created the social force that secured the victory of the Great October Socialist Revolution in 1917 and the building of socialism in our country. In order to successfully solve world historical problems during the First Russian Revolution, the Russian proletariat, under the leadership of the party created by Lenin, waged an uncompromising struggle against the liberal bourgeoisie, paralyzing its attempts to take the lead of the masses, persistently strengthened the alliance of workers and peasants. The Bolsheviks worked tirelessly to raise the level of the political consciousness of the working class, rallying its ranks, forming it into the combat army of the revolution. They led the strikes and demonstrations of workers in the period of maturation of the revolutionary crisis of 1901–1904. They were in the midst of the masses on 9 January, tirelessly explaining to the workers the profound meaning of the events that occurred, calling on the proletariat for a decisive struggle against Tsarism. 3 months after the outbreak of the revolution, in April 1905, having overcome numerous difficulties connected primarily with the schismatic opportunist activity of the Mensheviks, the Bolsheviks convened the Third Congress of the RSDLP, which played an exceptionally important role in the deployment of the revolution. Proceeding from a deep understanding of the essence of the People's Revolution, the Third Congress, led by Lenin, developed a strategic plan for the further development of the bourgeois democratic revolution. This plan provided for the isolation of the liberal bourgeoisie, the exercise of the hegemony of the proletariat, the strengthening of the alliance of the working class with the peasantry as a force that alone could ensure the complete victory of the revolution. Especially important role in the development of the revolution was played by the resolutions of the Third Congress on armed insurrection and the attitude towards the peasant movement. The first gave a clear statement on the question that the interests of the victory of the revolution require the working class and its party to work actively to prepare for an armed uprising put on the order of the day by the whole course of the development of the revolution. As regards the attitude of social democracy towards the peasant movement, the Third Congress, having resolutely expressed its support for the revolutionary actions of the peasantry, demanded from all members of the party to propagandize in the broad strata of the people that the Social Democrats set themselves the most energetic support for all revolutionary measures of the peasantry capable of to improve its position, up to the confiscation of landowners, state, church, monastery and individual lands. 1. Proceeding from the fact that the main question of any revolution is the question of power, the Third Congress adopted a special resolution on a provisional revolutionary government, which was to become the organ of the revolutionary democratic dictatorship of the proletariat and the peasantry. It was to carry out the most complete and consistent democratic transformations of the entire social system, establish a democratic republic, confiscate land from the landowners and transfer them to the peasants, introduce an 8-hour day, put an end to national oppression and national discrimination against non-Russian peoples. Social democracy, under the appropriate conditions, was to take part in the provisional revolutionary government, so that the pressures from above could contribute more to the full implementation of the minimum program of the RSDLP. The social transformations of the provisional revolutionary government should, to the greatest extent, facilitate the growth of the bourgeois democratic revolution into a socialist revolution. The resolutions of the Third Congress of the RSDLP, developed under the leadership of V. Lenin, were a serious contribution to the treasury of Marxism-Leninism, enriching it with new provisions relating to the strategy and tactics of the proletariat in the bourgeois democratic revolution of the era of imperialism. 1. The CPSU and resolutions and decisions of congresses, conferences and plenums of the Central Committee, Part I, p. 80. Ist. 7th. Gospodizdat. 1953. The Bolsheviks fought for the implementation of the decisions of the Third Congress in a fierce struggle against the Mensheviks. Having refused to participate in the work of the Third Congress of the RSDLP, the Mensheviks convened their conference in Geneva, at which they adopted decisions that were permeated to the spirits of opportunism from beginning to end. These decisions disoriented the proletariat, pushed it to the path of cooperation with the liberal bourgeoisie, the way of recognizing its leadership in the revolution. In order to expose the opportunism of the Mensheviks and to protect the decisions of the Third Congress of the RSDLP, Lenin wrote the famous book Two Tactics of Social Democracy in the Democratic Revolution, published in July 1905. The great significance of this book lies in the fact that in it Lenin deeply developed the question of the peculiarities of the bourgeois democratic revolution in the era of imperialism, its driving forces and prospects for development, substantiated the idea of the hegemony of the proletariat and its alliance with the peasantry, as an indispensable condition for victory revolution. V. Lenin proved that the victorious bourgeois democratic revolution in Russia should lead not to the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, but to the revolutionary democratic dictatorship of the proletariat and the peasantry. Lenin formulated the basic provisions on the development of the bourgeois democratic revolution into the socialist revolution. This was a new attitude, hitherto absent in the Marxist doctrine of the revolution. Subsequently, these provisions were developed by V. Lenin in the completed theory of the socialist revolution. Lenin's book Two Tactics of Social Democracy in the Democratic Revolution ensured the victory of the truly revolutionary tactics of the Bolsheviks over the opportunist tactics of the Mensheviks and dealt a crushing blow to the reformists of the Second International. creatively developing the teachings of K. Marx and F. Engels in new historical conditions. Lenin armed not only the Russian but also the international proletariat with a mighty ideological weapon in the struggle for the revolutionary transformation of society. The Bolshevik Party, armed the proletariat with genuinely revolutionary tactics, daily guided its struggle, tirelessly rallying the ranks of workers, raising the level of their political consciousness, expanding and strengthening their ties with the peasantry. All this, together with the party's tremendous work to expose the treacherous line of the Mensheviks and socialist revolutionaries, was the decisive condition that enabled the proletariat to push the liberal bourgeoisie away from the leadership of the revolutionary masses and isolate it. At all the stages of the First Russian Revolution, the proletariat not only went in the vanguard of the struggle, but also was its true leader. The experience of the First Russian Revolution irrefutably proved that the leader and hegemon of a genuinely popular revolution in the era of imperialism can only be the working class.